The first crack in everything came on a Thursday. Midway through a weekly video call, my vision began to smear at the edges, text and faces melting like watercolor left in the rain. For 3 weeks, I'd been living on adrenaline and synthetic caffeine. 16-hour days, instant coffee, vending machine sandwiches, convincing myself exhaustion was just a temporary sacrifice for a project that could make or break us. I was the lead engineer. Failure wasn't an option. When I tried to rise after the meeting, my legs folded under me like old scaffolding. A coworker steadied me into a chair. Someone handed me a paper cup of water that I could barely lift. The conference room looked unreal, faces floating in shifts of focus. My manager watched me with the kind of concern reserved for people in a movie. "Go home," he said. "You look like you weren't meant to see another minute." He arranged a taxi. Someone walked me to my car. I pulled over twice on the way, each stop a small surrender to the dizzy world inside my skull. All I could think was, get home. Tell her. She'll know what to do. She'll hold me while I patch whatever's tearing under my skin. I pushed the front door open and stepped into a room that felt both familiar and foreign. There she was, laptop open, legs tucked under her, fingers moving over the keys. Her blog, a tidy corner of the internet full of cushions and color palettes, glowed on the screen. "You're home early," she said without lifting her eyes. I sat hard in the armchair across from her, the world still tilting. "I nearly passed out at work," I said. "I had to leave. I don't feel well." She glanced at me like she'd caught the tail end of a commercial. "Did you eat?" she asked. "I haven't had anything proper in days either, just coffee." "There's leftover pizza in the fridge." Those words landed like small, cold stones. No offer to make tea, no alarm in her voice. No, "Let me drive you." No one-worded panic to summon the gravity of what had happened. Just logistics, lunch options, supply levels, as if my collapse was a scheduling hiccup. "Something's really wrong," I said, trying to thread urgency into the conversation. "I'm dizzy. I think I need to see a doctor." "You work too much," she replied, voice steady, eyes on the screen. "I've told you that before." I expected the next thing to be hand-holding, a phone call, anything that would make me feel less vertiginous. Her next sentence was a simple exhale of responsibility. "I'm not your caregiver. You're an adult. There are quiet things your partner can do that say they're in your corner. Cook for you when you're sick, slow down when you need to, notice." I had done all of that for her. 3 days off when she had food poisoning, driving to appointments after her wrist broke, being the person on call when plans collapsed. Her words were a revelation and a rebuke. The care I'd given was a one-way street. I went to urgent care by myself. 2 hours in a plastic chair later, a technician's clipboard told me what my body already knew. Dangerously high blood pressure, severe dehydration, a system running at redline. The doctor wrote prescriptions and a blunt set of orders. Rest, diet changes, slow rebuilding. He asked if I had anyone at home to help. I thought about the couch, the laptop glow, the woman who'd told me I was not her responsibility. I almost laughed. When I finally walked back through the front door with a prescription bag and doctor's warning ringing in my ears, she was cooking. 1 plate, 1 place setting. "How was it?" she asked, flipping something in the pan. "Terrible," I said. "Doctor said I'm on the edge of a heart event if I don't change." She shrugged, casual as weather. "Maybe you'll listen to me now when I tell you to slow down," she said. Her tone had the distance of someone commenting on traffic on the radio. I sat at the kitchen table and felt, inexplicably, very small. That night I lay in bed beside a person who saw me as a scheduling problem and a paycheck, not as someone whose body had just warned him it might stop. Somewhere between the beeping streetlights and the hum of the refrigerator, something inside me hardened into resolve. If she refused to take responsibility for my well-being, I would take it for myself. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in years and spent that day doing something I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long time. I researched what would actually save me. High blood pressure, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, fixable things but not by willpower alone. I needed structure, guidance, a steady plan. I signed up for a cardiac rehab-oriented program at a nearby facility that promised monitored exercise, nutrition counseling, and stress management. When I walked into that gym, the reception smiled, felt different from the blank stare I'd grown used to at home. The woman behind the desk, mid-30s, steady eyes, a name badge that said Physical Therapy Director, asked about my situation with a real curiosity, not the polite nodding professionals sometimes offer. Her questions landed like lifelines. How long have you been this tired? What do you sleep like? Any chest pain? She listened. She didn't just wait for her turn to speak. Good you're here, she said after I finished. Lots we can do. Start slow. Heart rate monitored, breath work, nutrition. We'll get you steady. I walked out with a schedule. 3 sessions a week, a plan that looked like care in the form of calendars and checkboxes. For the first time since my project began devouring me, someone treated my body as if it mattered. As I drove home, the weight of the day felt lighter, because someone, a stranger, had seen the danger and responded with competence and empathy. I stepped back into the house and she was where she always was, laptop light, fingers moving. Where were you? She asked. At the gym, I said. It was, Don't go overboard, she warned without looking up. You always get obsessed. Her warning would have felt familiar a month earlier. Now it sounded like static. I'd spent the day in a place that acknowledged my fragility and offered a path forward. At home, the person I had promised forever to was still unconcerned. I realized then that the next time I went back to that gym, I wouldn't just be exercising my body. I'd be testing a different kind of attention, one that kept showing up. The first weeks in the program were humbling. My body, once trained to survive long shifts and impossible deadlines, now trembled after 10 minutes on the treadmill. Sensors tracked my pulse. A nurse hovered nearby, reminding me to breathe deeply, to slow down when dizziness flickered in my eyes. For the first time in years, I was not praised for endurance, but guided toward moderation. At home, the contrast grew sharper. She never asked how the sessions went. When I brought home a folder of nutritional plans, she flipped through the pages absent-mindedly and then tossed them aside, muttering, "That's way too strict for me." Dinner remained takeout or whatever quick fix she preferred. I learned to cook separately, my plate lined with greens and lean proteins, hers with pizza boxes stacked like evidence of a life running parallel, not with me. At the facility, however, something else unfolded. The physical therapy director, her name was Lauren, had a way of speaking that balanced authority with warmth. She didn't just tell me what to do, she explained why. When I asked why my heart rate spiked so suddenly, she walked me through how chronic stress reshapes the body's baseline. When I asked if change was possible at my age, she smiled and said, "Of course." The body is desperate to heal if you give it the chance. Her words hit me harder than she probably realized. At home, my exhaustion had been met with indifference. Here, my vulnerability was not only noticed, but respected. It wasn't attraction at first. It was recognition. Someone finally saw that I was breaking, and they didn't look away. The weeks bled into months. My sessions lengthened. My breath steadied. I slept through the night for the first time in years. Lauren noticed everything. How my posture shifted, when my energy lagged, when my spirit lifted. "You're learning balance," she said one afternoon after a particularly solid workout. "Not just with exercise. With yourself, balance." The word clung to me as I drove home to a relationship that had grown colder than the tiled floors of the rehab center. My partner had once filled our house with ideas about redesigning rooms, weekend trips, small projects. Now, the only light in her eyes came from the laptop screen. Our conversations were mostly calendar logistics, bills, groceries, schedules. Once, when I mentioned that Lauren had adjusted my workout plan because I was progressing, she quipped, "She must have a lot of time to notice all that about you." The tone was sharp, but not from jealousy, more from irritation that I dared to bring something alive into a house gone stale. One evening, as I chopped vegetables for my carefully measured dinner, I asked her if she wanted to join me at the gym. "They have beginner programs," I said, trying to open a door for her. She laughed without looking up from her phone. "I don't need someone telling me how to walk on a treadmill." "I'm fine." The laughter echoed in the kitchen like a slammed door. But I wasn't fine, and I knew it. The gym wasn't just fixing my heart, it was reteaching me what care looked like. Lauren's team asked, checked, guided. Every "how are you today" carried weight. Every adjustment was tailored. Every small victory was celebrated. Care wasn't a lecture or a shrug or a reminder that I was an adult. It was attention, presence, partnership, and as much as I tried not to, I began to compare. One late afternoon, after a particularly draining session, I lingered in the parking lot with Lauren. She was jotting notes on my chart, the fading sun catching the strands of hair around her face. She looked up and said softly, "I'm proud of how far you've come. Most people quit when it gets uncomfortable. You keep showing up." My throat tightened. I wanted to say, "You're the only one who notices." Instead, I nodded and muttered, "Thanks." That night, lying in bed beside the woman who hadn't asked a single question about my health in weeks, I realized something terrifying. The distance between us wasn't new. It had always been there, disguised by routine and busyness. My collapse at work had just torn off the veil, and in its place, another truth was emerging. A truth that glowed faintly every time Lauren looked me in the eyes and saw more than just a man paying for a program. She saw a man trying to live. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, not even to myself. But the quiet shift had already begun. The shift grew louder with time. I noticed it in the smallest of moments. The way Lauren listened without rushing, the way her encouragement felt like oxygen in a room I hadn't realized was suffocating me. Each session became more than exercise. It was a reprieve, a reminder that connection could still exist. Meanwhile, at home, silence expanded like mold in the corners of a forgotten room. We still lived together, still shared a roof and bills, but intimacy had evaporated. Meals were separate, schedules diverged, evenings passed with her lost inside her glowing screen while I sat on the couch, trying to summon words that might spark life between us. Nothing did. One Sunday afternoon, she announced casually, "I'm going away for a few days." A blogger's retreat. No question, no invitation, just information, as if I were a roommate. I nodded. A part of me felt relieved. At least I wouldn't have to perform the play of "we're fine" for a few days. Those days became pivotal. With the house empty, I filled the silence with new routines. Long walks, home-cooked meals, journaling. I realized how much lighter life felt when I wasn't bracing against her indifference. The absence wasn't painful. It was liberating. When she returned, bags spilling into the hallway, I tried to tell her about the progress I'd made at rehab, how my blood pressure had lowered for the first time in months. She smiled vaguely, kissed my cheek without passion, and said, "That's good. Can you help me bring in the luggage?" The moment evaporated. My victory was mine alone. Contrast sharpened the edges of my reality. At the gym, Lauren celebrated every small change. An extra 5 minutes on the bike, a steadier breath during stretching. At home, my milestones landed in silence. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. One environment nurtured me, the other drained me. One evening, after a late session, Lauren walked me to the door as usual. But this time, she hesitated. "You look different lately," she said, searching my face. "Not just stronger?" "Lighter. Like you're carrying less." Her words struck something tender in me. "Maybe because here, I don't feel invisible," I admitted before I could stop myself. The vulnerability hung in the air, risky and raw. Lauren didn't flinch. She held my gaze, steady and unafraid. "No one should feel invisible in their own life," she said. "You deserve more than just surviving." That sentence replayed in my head all night, louder than the silence of the house, louder than the tapping of her keys on her laptop. I lay awake knowing something irreversible had shifted. It wasn't that I wanted to betray the woman I'd built a life with. It was that the life itself already felt broken, hollowed out by neglect. I had been clinging to a partnership that existed only in name, and here was someone who not only saw me but reminded me I was worth being seen. The next morning, I looked at my reflection and whispered the truth to myself for the first time. I can't keep living like this. That realization wasn't an ending yet, but it was the first undeniable step toward one. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Outwardly, nothing had changed. We still shared the same address, the same routines, the same stale exchanges about bills and groceries. But inside, a tectonic shift was underway. I had admitted something to myself, and once spoken, even in a whisper, it refused to be silenced. At the rehab center, progress accelerated. My stamina increased, my confidence returned. With every drop of sweat, I felt myself rebuilding, not just physically but emotionally. Lauren's presence amplified the transformation. She wasn't just monitoring my heart rate, she was teaching me to trust myself again, to believe that I could build a life not defined by collapse or indifference. At home, however, I saw more clearly than ever how empty things had become. One night, after I cooked dinner for both of us, she pushed the plate away untouched, muttering that she'd already eaten takeout earlier. I stared at the cooling food and realized I had been cooking not for her, but for a memory of who she once was. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the electricity bill? What time is your appointment? Can you pick up milk? There was no, how are you? No, I missed you. No sign of the intimacy that had once made our house feel like a home. The contrast gnawed at me. I found myself lingering longer at the rehab center, volunteering for extra sessions, asking more questions just to stay in that atmosphere of care a little longer. Sometimes, after workouts, Lauren and I would talk while the room emptied. About books, about the ways people change, about the courage it takes to rebuild. She had an ease that made time dissolve, and I realized how long it had been since I'd felt that spark of genuine connection with anyone, let alone the woman waiting at home. One evening, after a particularly tough session, I admitted, I don't recognize my life anymore. It feels like I'm living beside someone, not with them. The words slipped out before I could catch them. Lauren didn't rush to respond. She studied me for a moment, then said softly, Sometimes the hardest truth is realizing that staying can be lonelier than leaving. That sentence struck me like lightning. I carried it with me through the night, through the silence of another dinner eaten in separate rooms, through the empty ritual of lying side by side without touching. I began to notice small betrayals I had ignored before, not infidelities of the flesh, but of the heart. The way she never asked about my health, even after my collapse. The way she seemed more invested in strangers online than in the man sitting across from her. The way she had redefined our relationship as roommates without ever saying it aloud. The next morning, as I laced my shoes for another gym session, I realized something vital. I wasn't just fighting for my heart to keep beating. I was fighting for a life that felt alive. And for the first time, I let myself imagine what that life might look like, even if it didn't include her. The more I imagined it, the more impossible it became to ignore. I pictured a future where I didn't have to beg for scraps of attention, where I didn't feel guilty for needing care, where conversation wasn't reduced to schedules and utility bills. At first, those thoughts felt like betrayal, but then I realized betrayal had already happened, not in secret meetings or hidden messages, but in years of neglect, in the steady erosion of partnership until nothing was left but obligation. At the rehab center, my body kept proving that change was possible. My heart grew steadier, my strength returned. Each milestone reminded me that what felt permanent could be rebuilt with intention. Why couldn't that apply to my life as well? Lauren never crossed boundaries. She wasn't inappropriate, never suggested anything beyond the professional. And yet, her presence was a mirror I couldn't look away from. She showed me what simple empathy felt like, what it meant to be noticed, to be valued. She didn't have to say much. Her actions spoke. The way she adjusted a machine so I wouldn't strain. The way she remembered details I had mentioned weeks earlier. The way her eyes carried no judgment, only clarity. At home, the gap grew more unbearable. One evening, I tried again to bridge it. Do you ever feel like we're drifting apart? I asked cautiously, hoping for a spark of honesty, a chance to rebuild. She didn't even look up from her screen. Everyone feels that, sometimes, she said flatly. You're just stressed. Don't overthink it. Her words landed like a door slamming shut. I wanted to shout, to tell her that stress didn't explain everything, that I had collapsed at work, that I had been clawing my way back to health while she sat in the next room and treated it like an inconvenience. But I didn't. I swallowed it, realizing for the 100th time that my pain had no place in her world. And so I did. I walked the quiet streets alone, the dusk painting everything in muted gold, and as I moved, I realized the truth. I wasn't lonely because I was alone. I was lonely because I was with someone who made me feel unseen. The next morning, clarity arrived like a blade. I had already left her in my heart. The body was the last to follow. I began small preparations, sorting papers, checking accounts, imagining apartments where silence didn't feel like suffocation but like peace. I didn't tell her. There was no space to. But inside, the choice solidified. At the gym, Lauren must have sensed something. You seem lighter, she said one day as we finished a session. Maybe because I'm finally telling myself the truth, I replied. She tilted her head, eyes soft. That's where all real healing starts. Her words stayed with me long after I left. For the first time in years, the future no longer looked like a dark tunnel. It looked open, uncertain. but alive. And I knew, deep in my bones, that survival was no longer enough. It was time to choose life. The following weekend, I began the tangible steps of reclaiming my life. I looked at our home with fresh eyes, not through the lens of shared history, but as a place I had to navigate carefully to preserve my own well-being. I sorted through closets, bagged items I wouldn't take with me, cataloged what I needed to arrange before leaving. Each action felt like a declaration. I was creating space for myself, physically and emotionally. She noticed, of course. "What are you doing?" she asked, feigning casual curiosity as I moved boxes around the living room. "Preparing," I said simply. No explanation, no justifications. She frowned but said nothing more. I spent hours planning, not just the logistics of leaving, but the logistics of starting over. Apartment listings, finances, schedules, every detail meticulously considered. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't impulsive, it was a measured act of reclaiming agency over my own life. Meanwhile, my body thrived. Gym sessions were no longer just workouts, they were affirmations. Each repetition, each stretch, each controlled breath reminded me that my health, my strength, my life were finally mine to protect. Lauren noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said one day, checking my vitals. "Not just physically. You carry yourself differently. You move with intent. I'm learning what it feels like to matter to someone who actually cares," I admitted quietly. Her smile was warm but gentle, the kind of recognition I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't complicated. It was human acknowledgement, simple and sustaining. That evening, back at home, I made a final observation that sealed my decision. I watched her scroll through her phone, ignoring everything around her, including me. The life I had once shared with her was no longer something I could inhabit with dignity. She had made her priorities clear over the years, her projects, her comforts, her routines, and I had absorbed the neglect quietly, too long. I realized then that leaving wasn't just about finding someone who cared, or even about escaping indifference. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about honoring the man who nearly collapsed from exhaustion but refused to vanish quietly into the background of someone else's life. And so, when the final weekend rolled around, I executed the plan I had envisioned for weeks. Everything I needed was ready. Keys, paperwork, essentials, all organized. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I moved with certainty, each step a statement. I choose myself. That night, I lay in the quiet apartment I had chosen, the first home that felt fully mine in years. No expectations, no indifference, no invisible walls pressing in. Just space, silence, and the faint hum of life around me. And in that silence I understood, survival had been temporary. This freedom, health, agency, self-respect, this was life.